Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. Today we have Mark L. Vincent with us. Mark is a pioneer in multiple fields. Mark partners with accomplished third-turn leaders, committing to developing the current and next generation of effective leadership. He's a certified executive process consultant, a micro partner here in North America, helping individuals and organizations grow in emotional intelligence and mission effectiveness. And I think today he's going to tell us a little bit more about the three turns of leaders. But with that, Mark, why don't you give yourself a little bit more of an introduction and maybe some of your backstory?
Well, I can do just a little bit of both of those. People may be interested to know that my wife and I are a second marriage. We were both widowed, and we had, with our spouses, all been in the same college together. And after both of our spouses died, with the encouragement of some others, because they knew we were corresponding with each other, we were old friends and all, and helping each other out, we explored our hearts and ended up married. And so now there's 6 children and spouses and grandchildren all across the country. So we're somewhat nomadic, kind of floating in and around where our children and their families are and working from those locations. The backstory really for me would just be to say that I was a right person, I would like to think, at a right place and time, which those are things that are beyond anybody's control. But I was working at graduate school on complex problem solving and group decision making, like when things really have to come together in some way because they're really stuck and you may have multiple interests in play. And how do you do that well? What are the methodologies that are out there? And there wasn't a lot of social science looking at how those, what the methods might be that work and what would really work well. And that was about the time that Harvard Negotiation Project was publishing. And their most famous book of all, a very popular book, was Getting to Yes by Fisher and Urey. And most people, like you just did, because we're on camera together, they nod their head, oh yeah, I've heard of that book. Well, that was newfangled kumbaya stuff, win-win scenarios and brainstorming and mind mapping and things get talked about that were very new, because what everyone was used to, if they were in business, was the tall white man tells us what to do, we do what he says. And to actually have someone interested in what you think and to team up to figure things out, that was newer, especially to have a methodology that was reliable. So I'm writing about this, working at it at an academic in an academic environment, but I started to get asked questions. Would you come help us? We heard that you're working on these methodologies, and I found out not only do the methods work, I had some gifting to be able to facilitate that stuff, and a career was born. And so almost anything that you might read about what I've been a part of or who I've gotten to connect to across the years would tie back to that master's paper I was writing, my thesis on group process and decision making, and that's where everything seems to have proceeded from there.
It's so fascinating to me. Excuse me. I believe it was the late Dr. Stephen Covey that said in his study leading up, and as he started to look into leadership, everything leading up to the 1900s, early 1900s, was all about good character. It was all about how you became a better person to become a better leader. From the 1900s up into, I would say, the 1980s, 1990s, everything was really about what I believe he called manipulation. How do you manipulate people to get what you want? And then we kind of have progressed, which I say progressed, but in some ways went backwards, to what we were talking about in the 17 and 1800s. Yes. But also all of the processes that have come out of the past 2 to 3 decades, I think, is unbelievable. And you were right there at the forefront of that and working with it and writing on it.
Yeah, I just kind of stumbled into it. I was working in a situation where I didn't have good handles to lead some committee meetings where I was all of a sudden the leader. And I found out that after the meeting, there were parking lot conversations where the real meeting took place. So we just wasted time and money to have a formal meeting when all the informal stuff afterwards took it apart. And what I learned in this study were ways to have the informal parts of the organization inform our formal proceedings rather than the other way around. So you have to do your mingling and coffee drinking and what do you think about kinds of conversations leading up to the actual formal, we're meeting now, here's our agenda, here's the report, what do we think? So that you're removing surprises and first reactions out of the mix. You already have a good idea what those reactions are, what the responses are, and people have had time to let new ideas settle in before they're forced to deliberate on them. Because almost all of us, you're surprised by something, you're against it until you're for it.
Yep.
Until you can see the benefit, you're in reserve. And if we just run into a meeting, hey, we got to get through these 5 things, and people are in reaction mode, they're not in a thoughtful mode, they're not in their higher order, their executive order of their brain, executive function of their brain. They're down into, is this a line and is it going to kill me? And that doesn't produce good results. And so you end up with other processes trumping the formal one. And that's a very, very expensive thing to keep doing.
Absolutely. Now, I am curious, over your impressive 40-year career, you've built all kinds of leadership development, executive advising, helping build communities. But what really started that passion and keeps that passion going today of trying to train the next generation of leaders?
The entrepreneurs and founders I've come to know across the years who were in what they were doing for something more than I've got to get my share of the money, gyp or not, that's not the right word to use, but to cheat people out of their money, to get what's coming to me before other people do. I'm not talking about those kinds of folks. I'm talking about those who say, I want to build something toward legacy. I want to create something my children will be proud of. I want to build something for my community and my employees will be able to own it when I'm done, or I see an opportunity here that will make the world better. All of those people I've been privileged to listen to and work with and walk alongside across the years find that the continuity of the business, which will include their succession planning, whether it's to a person or to a group, or whether they're going to sell or acquire something but hand it off to someone else, whatever that is, it's a very fragile moment where all of the value relationally and financially that they built could collapse in a heartbeat. So as they work with that, a key part of it is how they have developed themselves so that their ego doesn't get in the way as they hand it off, and how they are developing others behind them coming up alongside and probably developing more than could ever be their successor, and blessing other organizations with that kind of quality of leadership. High character remains important. High competence remains important. And one of the key competencies we all are aware of, and more than ever, is the ability to keep learning, not the ability to know and repeat and parrot what you've already learned, but to stay in a learning mode so that as new circumstances come, you can face into them and learn. So that development of the person as well as their skill is the central act of a long and strong career that then helps successors get slingshotted into the future instead of having to overcome obstacles that founders and predecessors never took care of. So that dynamic, to be able to have continuity and ongoing propelling of others into a hopeful future is a good work, and it's a hard work. And then I'll just add this, Amos, that that last chapter of leadership, when those things are happening, that's what everyone will remember and talk about. So if you have a great career and at the end you tank it because, you didn't know what life you were going to go to, or you're afraid somebody's going to ruin something and couldn't let go, people will say, boy, Amos built a great business. But at the end, but at the end becomes the epitaph. That it's the most strong memory that people will talk about. And this is a way to mitigate that so that they might not remember you, but they remember the business. They remember its mission. They remember its impact. And that's what gets talked about. And if you are remembered, you're remembered as this really unique and wonderful leader that made the way for what everybody gets to benefit from now.
So as well with your personal story, balancing work, family, you mentioned a little bit your late wife and her health challenges. That is a very moving story. And kind of thinking about one of my favorite books of all time is Good to Great by Jim Collins. Mm-hmm. And he talks about leadership in there, and that, you know, the best leaders oftentimes had an epiphany during something challenging that happened in their lives, whether they were a prisoner of war, they had a spouse that was sick, they themselves were sick. And so my question to you is, how did that experience shape your views on leadership, and did it have any impact?
Oh, yeah. Well, what a powerful question. My first wife and I were the same age. So we're 36 years old. We've got elementary school children. And she is diagnosed with a very rare and a very aggressive cancer. And there are no 5-year survival rates for it. If a reoccurrence comes, this is 1999, 2000. If a reoccurrence comes, it's basically get into hospice, get your affairs in order, because there's just nothing more that can be done. My wife, I won't go into the long story because it's a long story, lived 16 years after her diagnosis. She had 19 occurrences. She was never in remission. She had 4 lung resections. She was in years of chemo. She nearly died several times. She was in a MAID protocol for the better part of a year. That was in 2001. That was probably the most brutal of all the years. But she had no short-term memory for most of the year. She nearly died a couple of times, hospitalized almost the whole time. She went in with 29 tumors. She came out with none. The next month after, hey, there's no tumors, she's got a new one. But then at that point, we were able to attack the cancer surgically. That was only the real strategy for us, until such as a time that it would grow where we could not get at it. And that happened in 2015. So, you know, it's almost, I've compared it sometimes like to death by piranha. It's just a lot of bites, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And her spirit just kept soaring even as her body kept declining. Her impact on people kept growing even as she could do less. One quick story is that when she died, I got a call from her oncologist who had retired. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. Like, how many people outlive their oncologist's career?
Yeah.
She did. She lived so long that she actually had to have her port replaced because it stopped functioning and she was still alive. And when they wheeled her out after the surgery, everybody comes out of the oncology ward at the teaching hospital when this happened, because they'd never seen someone who outlived the functionality of their port and had to have a new one put in. So just remarkably resilient. And but anyway, the oncologist called me and says, I'm in the car driving. It's about a 1,000-mile drive from where he had retired. I'm driving. I'm coming. I'd love to say a few words at her funeral. Now, what oncologist does that?
Yeah.
For, you know, their whole patient load that they carry. And that just says something about who my first wife, Lori, was. So I'm watching her across this time. I'm living in our family. We're trying to figure out how to keep our kids healthy and have a good childhood. How do we avoid medical bankruptcy? That became the great big enterprise success, was staying out of medical bankruptcy, getting our kids raised and all that. In the middle of all that, it occurs to me about a third of the way in, this is not a chapter in our book. This is the story. This is the book. How we do this. And I learned a lot from Lori in particular, who had all this time in bed and could really distill some things. So 2 statements. One was, I'm not going to give this one more second than it demands. It's going to take everything in the end. I'm not going to give it one more second than it demands. And the second is, if there's anything at all to take care of, get after it. Get it done. So that at any moment in your life, you're at peace with your neighbor, your family members, your friends, and you can really, you know, anybody who says, I want to drink life to the fullest, well, then you can, because you're not delaying what you're facing. You're not living so far into the future that you're no current present reality with people. You're able to be in the moment with the people that you're with, doing something good instead of wasting your life being angry, complaining, whatever. And so I followed behind a very profound example of this. And as a caretaker in that, I probably also learned that there was a lot that was stripped away from me because you're down to managing your crisis, getting your work done, loving your family. That's about all I had capacity for. And so I don't really sweat small things anymore. And so in a conversation, I'm pretty able to discern whether this is an important thing or whether it's a nice to have thing.
Yep.
And maybe a little bit quicker at sniffing it out than some others might be because all their emotions are tied up with it and so forth. And so I'm actually quite thankful for the resulting gift of that kind of perspective through all of that very long struggle. But those would be the things that it just became crystal clear that let's get after what matters. Let's do something that brings meaning, and don't waste my time. Like, I've got grandkids. I'd rather be reading them a story, holding their hand, walking in a park, than being in a meeting that's not going to go anywhere. And so would most employees and other workers.
Thank you for sharing that. I truly believe that many times some of those things in our lives that happen, there's so much to learn out of it. And for someone as yourself, being a thought leader in this space and kind of sharing what you learned, I think that is so powerful. And although we're going to talk about several other pieces, those life lessons, I think, are the ones that we need to really pay attention to and take home with us.
And with your background as a coach, especially in athletics, that mental sharpness, that ability to focus, makes all the difference in the world and makes up for a whole lot of lack of athletic ability. And so I think if we got going here, you'd have quite a few stories to tell.
Yes. And what came to mind to me was I think you should rewrite the Spencer Johnson book, The Present, because what you really described was how you stay present. I mean, in reality. So thank you so much for that. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is one of your terms, which are the 3 turns of executive leadership. So can you give us an idea, a brief overview of what that is, the 3 turns of executive leadership?
All of us have ways that we can construct or map out lifetime and human development and all those things. And so we're just taking some of that and putting it on the overlay of someone who's going to have an executive career. And let's start with this, that about the last statistic I read, it's like 86% of American people who enter the workforce will never have a true leadership or managerial role. They're not going to run an organization. They're going to be employed for their skills, their gifts, and all of that. And out of the 14% that are invited to lead an organization, well, some of them aren't going to be successful. Some of them are only going to do it for a couple of years and all that. So out of the, let's say 100 people enter the workforce today, 14 at some point will lead an organization. And of that 14, only 14%, and now my math will run out on me, but was that 4 people?
Yep.
Will actually have the opportunity to move into a third turn. So the third turn isn't, oh, you're more successful than others. Any of these lives that I'm describing can be great, but we start young and we're learning, and then we're in our prime, and then we're wrapping it up. And those are those kind of 3 turns. And if we put that on to executive leadership, what we're saying is we have to first learn to lead ourselves and learn our skills, learn what we're capable of, learn what we enjoy. We might need ability to have a restart and grow in that and get some experiences, see whether people trust us and all that. And out of that, some people are going to be artisanal in their whole employment career. They're working the lathe and making that perfect wooden bowl. Or they are customer service and they are the best customer service person you've ever seen. They're so competent. You want new employees to sit beside them for a year and learn. And so they become like a mentor, but it's because of how drilled in they are with their skill. We don't want to lose that talent. We want to pay them well. We want them to be happy and in their work and have meaningful work, even though they're repeating a lot of things. And they take joy in that. Out of that group, there'll be some that have a hunger for something a little larger. Their vision kind of moves across the organization a little bit. They might have some entrepreneurial or creative gifts. If we did this and that, look what could happen. And so maybe they get opportunities and so forth. And if they succeed, they have an opportunity to run an organization. And I often put this saying that you can know for sure you're in a second turn if you've got P&L responsibility.
Okay.
The buck stops with you. Now you've got to lead the organization and you've got to lead people. And you're going to succeed in that second turn the way you succeeded in the first. In the first, you succeeded because you learned. You enter the second turn, you'll succeed if you learn. If you come in saying, I've arrived and I now know and I'm done learning, I'm going to trade off of what I've already done, well, then you're the poster child for the Peter principle, because you're not learning anymore and everything to you looks like an accounting problem or a marketing problem or an R&D problem or some mixture, whatever brought you to that point, because you're not comfortable with your incompetence yet to be able to pull gifts out of a team and pay attention to the lateral nature of running a whole organization. You're still doing it like you're in a vertical, like rising to the top of something. Now you're supporting the whole thing, including people who are stronger and more gifted than you. And let's say you come out of marketing and 6 months since you were running the marketing department, you're already now not the best marketing employee. So it'd be good if you stopped trying to be one, because people are reading the journals and they're in the meetings that you're not in, and marketing connects to finance, connects to sales, connects to R&D, whatever it might be. And you're responsible for all of the mortar of these bricks. You're not just a brick anymore. And I know I've been mangling a lot of metaphors in here, but these are ways that we can talk about it. So now it's not so much that you're an artisan, you're more like an artist. What's the vision you're bringing to this? Now, who are the other artisans you're going to be bringing together to do this installation of your work of art, this vision and strategy to make that happen? Out of that group of people, there are some that will have a long and successful run in a single organization or for a big chunk of their career toward the back half. And so they're not, 4 years here, 4 years there, 3 years here, 2 years there, a year out, and then back in. They are running and building and growing this organization. I'm pretty convinced it's because they're learning the whole time. And there's a humility with it. They're not trading off their accomplishments, constantly pointing to what we're doing together. They're hungry to keep it growing. That's what they care about the most. And what will happen is because of their visionary people, about 5 to 7 years before they're done, they're going to start sensing it. And they'll be casting out for the future value. We've figured these things out, but look at the marketplace. Look what this means. Like right now, the visionaries in our culture, in the U.S. culture, are saying, all right, if all the immigrant population is going to be deported, what does that mean for our worker pool?
Yep.
How are we going to address that? And they're strategizing with that in mind. Do we go to more technology and automation? Do we have to forge new alliances with schools and young people and get them in job training programs? They're going to be sorting through that. And as they do that, they begin to realize, I'm not going to be in the leadership chair when this thing goes live. Somebody else is going to be. Now, who is that? Where are they? Have I been developing them? Some have great leadership programs, and they have a great bevy of people to choose from, but maybe they haven't paid attention to the life that they'll go to when they step out. And others have been building a life. They've got a philanthropic vision, and they've got a family foundation, they've got all this stuff, but there's nobody behind them who can step in and take over. So it's a 360 multidimensional thing to move into this place where the third turn, you become a maestro. You become an orchestral leader. You're composing the score that everybody else is going to play, even as you move off the stage. And I'll wrap this long spiel up. It was by using the illustration I love to use of Beethoven and the Ninth Symphony. So Beethoven is deaf when he writes, as he completes the Ninth Symphony, and is not able to hear the performance when it premieres. Somebody else has to conduct it. He wants to conduct it. The story goes that he's off stage, unseen, conducting, but he can't hear, he can't know. And the orchestra went a little faster than he was conducting, but they're not watching and they're following the real, the conductor on the stage. And so somebody has to come and turn him around so he can see that the performance is over and that everyone is standing and applauding. But there's something about the way his focus took shape that he could hear how this would come out with everybody playing their part, even as his own abilities went into decline. And that particular piece of music, it's got a life of several centuries now. And what happens when the Berlin Wall comes down? We gather at the wall and we perform Ode to Joy.
Yep.
This tribute to the human spirit. So that might feel like an extreme example, but the ability to see what could be is gained across all those years of that work. And now you're giving that some shape so that the business has continuity, but it puts you into a brand new entrepreneurial moment, a very lonely place, because you're seeing things in the likelihood that others can't see yet. And now they have a whole lot more at stake than you did when you were starting out with that company 30 years ago. So those are those three turns: learn to lead self, learn to lead others, and an organization. And if the run is such, you have opportunity to talk about continuity, legacy, future value, and succession.
I like it. I often tell people in coaching them, no matter where you're at in the process, a lot of executives, to your point, you can't stop learning. If you stop learning, it becomes something else. But what I tell them is you always want to keep a beginner's mind. Because when you're a beginner and you're starting out, if you're a good leader, you're asking questions, you're talking to people, you're walking around, you're learning that entire time. And I've shared this story before, but I still remember my first role and I'm in air quotes, a leader. I felt I had been given a position of leadership, and I felt that made me a leader at about 19 years old. And so I am now the supervisor for folks that are 2 and 3 times my age. And I remember the very first night having a run-in with one of them, and they said, "Why should I do this?" I said, "Because I told you to."
Oh, that was opportunity to learn a lesson.
Exactly. Now, I will share that eventually, we worked things out. I learned very rapidly that was not the proper way to do things. Right. But I think it's you hit on it, that we should continue to always learn. Now, these 3 turns, in my mind, as I'm kind of thinking about it, at the very beginning, you're obviously learning how to lead yourself. And so that is, in my mind, the connection to emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
And then would the second, kind of piece of that, as you start to lead others, is that where you would say, or you do say, team development is that portion of it? And then that last portion is succession. Yeah.
Let's take the team development piece just for a second. In that first turn, you're part of learning to lead yourself is learning how to be a competent team member, and maybe to lead a team for some projects or whatever else. And as that's happening, the ones who are really growing in their leadership capacity, they're becoming aware that to be an excellent follower, or what you might say, growing your followership, is a similar trajectory to growing your leadership. And excellent leaders really long-term excellent leaders are great followers, because it's about accomplishing the mission. They sniff out, what role can I play? Do I need to be in front? Do I need to be behind the scenes? Do I need to be beside? How do I fill those gaps? And they work at their teamwork stuff. And then you have opportunity not just to lead a team, but to help multifunctionality of multiple teams and help others grow their team leadership and followership capabilities. And so in the second turn, you're doing that at scale with ultimate responsibility for the organization's success, not just your individual success. So you have this very palpable, very serious responsibility that now comes to you, that other people's welfare are in your hands. And the ability to manage the opportunities that come with that, along with all of the new problems, they kind of grow together. You'll get praise and you'll get criticism at a whole new level when you move into that second turn. And then, so yeah, you're now responsible for those teams. And then when you're moving into that third turn, you're handing that off to other people's stewardship who won't do it as you did it. And that has to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So out of the 800 organizations plus that you've worked with, what's one of the biggest mistakes you see leaders making as they try to go through these stages of leadership?
I think we've touched on it. I know it's the thing that just keeps coming up repeatedly. Like, it's really hard to think of an exception. And that is remaining in a learning and humble posture. Readiness to gain new insight and to grow beyond where you are, and not being defensive about it. Because without that, you will turn and try to thrash the process in the direction that you want it to go. And it starts to become, I know stuff, I'm telling you stuff, I'm the one that's right. And then we're not looking for new data. So the biggest mistake is to trust your judgment without data helping to inform it. We can flip it around. If all you're doing is looking at data and you're not trusting your gut, that can also be problems. They need to come together, trust and verify kinds of things. And the failure to do that will lead people to, kind of trying to lead out of bravado, a lot of, I'll talk louder and I'll talk everybody down. I don't want to hear things. I'm going to remove myself. I'm going to get isolated. Well, now people don't want to give you data because you don't listen anyway, and you get yelled at if you're a bearer of accurate but not good news. So that walling yourself off from reality because you got a distorted myth about yourself and your abilities is the big mistake. And you see it not just in the founder, you often see it showing up very quickly in successors. Because, hey, I've arrived. This is my trophy. Don't take my trophy away. Look at me. And there would be many people who say, I know better than that. Well, outwardly said is not the same as inwardly lived. And so that genuine, I need to learn. Tell me what you know. Let's figure out how we can do this together. I'm being a steward of the process. That is a very hard lesson, and one that around which a lot of the problems that we end up addressing are revolving.
So to me, it's kind of fascinating because from being an executive for years and then moving into the consulting and leadership business that I have now, I have been thrown a few times into a situation where I have become an executive again through contract because something happened. Somebody's passed away, somebody left unexpectedly. Yeah. And what I have found is it has really opened my eyes, because to lead as an executive temporarily, knowing it's temporary while you're in the process of finding the new executive, you're kind of, I guess in some ways what I'm kind of getting at, or I'm getting now, is that I'm fast forwarding to, I'm at the third turn, but not necessarily because I got there the traditional way, because that's the point that I'm at. But also it is so much easier to lead from that angle because there's nothing in my mind I want to do other than bring the talents of everybody out and make that organization as good as you can in that month, 2 months, 5 months, whatever it is.
Right.
But it's fascinating to me how different it is even for me. And I've learned so much because my approach is different than what it was when I knew I was going to be there for a decade.
Yeah. Well, let's just think about all the noise that's stripped out there for you mentally. You're not thinking, what's my comp? What's my bonus? How am I tracking against this? What do you think of me? How do I keep my position? All of that noise is out of the mix. And so your effectiveness ramps up hugely. And that's not to debate how, executive comp is put together. is just to recognize that when it's simple and you're forced to learn how effective you and your team become. There's also an urgency too, I'm thinking, from some of these stories, because you got to get something accomplished in a certain amount of time. And so everybody's kind of looking at the destination together, and you much more quickly get people on the same page. There's not all of this political jockeying. And so that is a motif. That's a great example of what strong third turn leaders do. They find a way to focus that, but as they're stepping out for others to step in. And that is high art. That's why I'm using music illustrations here. It's not just science. There's a lot of, is this the right moment? How do we get the tone right? How do we do this right? And it becomes an all-consuming job. And so I quite often will sit down with someone who's aware that they're getting fully into a third turn, say, then let's rewrite your job description with this in mind. Even if you can't show it to your board yet, you can't show it to anybody else yet, let's figure out what the job is from here so that you can be able to say at the end, we got it done.
Absolutely. So for that person that is at the beginning of their career, they're getting started, and they have that hunger, that thirst, they know that they're destined to become a leader. What advice would you give to that person getting started in that first round leading into the first turn? What piece of advice, if you could only give them one piece of advice, what would you tell them?
I would highly recommend they have one to several strong mentors, and that they have the courage to go ask someone to be the mentor. This is a little bit different than executive coaching. That's also very good to have, but an executive coach would be saying, for what end? And it ends up, when you're really new in your career, being a little bit more like life coaching, which is also good. So no complaints about that. But mentoring is, I see something here that I aspire to become. Will you give me the gift of your time to walk with me? Or if not you, who is someone that you might recommend? There's a person can feel like I'm being really brazen and assuming to do that. But a good mentor will sniff out if you're just kissing their behind.
Yep.
Or whether you're the real deal. So if you feel like you're the real deal, this isn't about posturing. It's not about collecting names and badges and logos, but getting connected to someone who's strong in their career and has invested in other leaders, and to say who you are is something I aspire to be. Can I, buy you a coffee 4 times a year? Can we do something like that just for me to pick your brain? There is no better resource than someone who will sow into you because they see you, but they can't see you unless you ask.
Very good advice. So as we're coming to an end, I have 3 questions now, and you are number 2. The last podcast I did, I just had a brainstorm and I said, I'm adding a question. So the first question is the new one.
Okay.
If we had a group of school administrators, elementary, middle, and high school administrators in front of us, what advice would you give to them as far as building curriculum or building leadership training into the youth? We're often saying that students today aren't learning this, or they're not learning this. And as it relates to leadership, what advice would you give if we could get a group of school administrators here? What would you say would be something that could help to move the needle for our youth?
The advice I would give would tie probably out of my own experience, what I found the most helpful for me. I had some great teachers and I had some great mentors, which is probably why I value it so much. And collectively, across a number of relationships, they taught me to be a critical thinker, to evaluate and to choose. So to look at what's in front of me, ask, is there anything more here? What else is there? And then begin to evaluate, so that you're not a reactive person, but you're a considered person. and neither are you stuck because I'm waiting for people to tell me what to do. You play into analyzing, experimenting, trying, and then engaging in reflection. Another way I've learned to talk about it is the action and reflection cycle. You act, you reflect. And out of that, you take another action, and then you reflect, and you live in that. Whatever helps them begin to think critically, as well as in teams, is an outstanding thing to have built in early in one's life. And I'm saying that not as a person who is an educator. I mean, I have opportunity to write curriculum, but it's all in the executive leadership development space. It's not tied to a child's pedagogy, but somewhere in there, the awakening of their critical thinking skills will give them more opportunities because they won't be functioning from fear. They'll be able to face things with some confidence that they can figure matters out. If I could say one more thing about it, Amos.
Sure.
People are being trained in over and over and over again in cylinders. Like, I run this software. That's what I do. And I can't make connections across and do critical thinking. I have a couple of manufacturing owners who are so frustrated because when they're hiring engineers, they're not getting people who are critical problem solvers. They're getting people who run sophisticated software. So if the software doesn't do it, they say it can't be done.
Yep.
And that owner, is like a crackpot inventor, and they go and figure it out. Then what do I need an engineer for? And then they're off making it happen because they're not limited by the digital space that they're in or by the tools that they've learned to work with.
So the next question is, what is your go-to book over the years that you have found yourself continually pulling off of the bookshelf and revisiting that has been with you for many years? Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher.
There's another book, Guide for the Perplexed, that I often draw on about as much, but Small is Beautiful is the first one. I pull it off my shelf a lot, and it's dog-eared, it's tattered, it's got markups. I quote from it all the time. E.F. Schumacher was writing in the 60s and 70s. He was the British coal board economist. He was noting in the 60s, wait a minute, we can't count coal as an asset the way we count corn, because it's a non-renewable asset and it has a life that will go away. So we've got to track this stuff different. And the fact that he would even talk about those things when he was the coal board economist, made him a very interesting person. And he was very thoughtful, and he wrote compact little essays that then get collected into this book. But they're so full of meat. And his basic thing was, when we're working with a smaller organization, it's leaner, it's able to turn and pivot, it's able to face into hard circumstances, and it creates opportunity for more leaders instead of everything flowing to one center, one uber super duper billionaire trillionaire kind of person. And we have some of those in our world now that we didn't then. And his point was, grow by multiplying, not by absorbing.
Yep.
So that people are learning to be lean, and there's ways that you can accumulate wealth by multiplying. And he talks about that a great deal. But the fact that there's pride to be that artisan who's got their little crofter shop and shows up at the farmer's market and has their own enterprise, there's great pride in that, as well as the person who's got 5 employees and they're there dipping the ice cream as well. They're going to live to see another day. It's really hard to kill some of those kinds of businesses because people will continue to sacrifice. You still have an entrepreneurial spirit for the work. So that has just been one that I keep going back to. It's a beloved book.
Awesome. And the last question is, today, what is your favorite piece of technology?
Wow, my favorite piece of technology. Okay, I'll be honest. It's brand new, and I'm learning to like it. I've resumed the game of golf, and now I have a rangefinder.
Okay.
That I can point at the flag, and it will tell me about how many yards. I'm an older guy now. My eyes don't always, give me the depth perception I want, so I can choose my club by it telling me, with the incline, decline, whatever. So it's a new toy. I'm having fun with it, learning to use it. I feel kind of hip, when I pull it off the golf cart and point it at the flag, like I really know what I'm doing when I don't. But that that would be one. It has nothing to do with work or life. It's recreation. It's rest. It's restoration. But I've never been technological with anything I've done athletic before, so this is a first, and I'm actually enjoying it.
Neat. So, where can our listeners find out more about you if they want to get engaged with you? Where can they find out more?
MarkLVincent.com would be the place where it's kind of a gateway to a number of things. That middle initial has become important to me in the Google era because the actor Vin Diesel's given name was Mark Vincent, and there's an opera singer in Australia whose name is Mark Vincent. So if you don't use L, well, we won't be able to connect. So MarkLVincent.com. And what I love with people is that they say, hey, can we just talk? Can I just put something in front of you? Let's think about this together. And sometimes would be a really good companion with them, to walk beside them. But quite often, maybe even more frequently, I'm not. But I've got a great network. I'm happy to connect people to a resource that really suits them. And so I enjoy meeting new people and having those conversations and figuring it out. And as we're saying here, I especially love talking with people who are saying, all right, I've built something. Now it's going to be in somebody else's hands. We got to figure out the journey from here.
Awesome. Well, Mark, excuse me. Thank you so much for joining us. I had so much fun in the conversation. I hope maybe you'll consider coming back and we can unpack some more pieces.
Be happy to. Very happy to.
Awesome. And for our listeners, don't forget to check out our past podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to just go down there to the bottom and give us 5 stars and say, hey, this is great. And hey, also, if you know somebody else that might benefit from the information, don't be afraid to share it. Until next time, we appreciate all of our listeners. We'll see you on the next episode.